equalization funds.
That is what we call equalization payments.
The feds make equalization payments to, quote, have-not provinces.
The problems that exist in the equalization formula.
5 other provinces get between $400 million and $2 billion. Quebec gets more than $11 billion.
One of the most contentious issues in federal-provincial relations, the equalization formula.
Canada's equalization payments have proven to be a contentious issue across the country. Like many other federal systems, Canada uses equalization to provide relief from the consequences of regional inequalities, such as uneven quality of public services between provinces and interprovincial migration. These problems are rooted in the uneven strength of regional economies and population centers, combined with the unequal distribution of wealth, such as natural resources. Equalization finds its roots in the British North America Act of 1867 and is firmly ingrained within Canadian federalism. During the Confederation of Canada, the 4 original provinces relinquished their ability to raise revenue through customs. The federal government retained the majority of taxation powers, yet provinces were responsible for delivering services such as healthcare and education to their constituents. Simultaneously, substantial differences were noted in the needs of various provinces, as the populations of Ontario and Quebec made up over 80% of the population. A consolidated revenue fund was established, out of which a per capita amount was paid by the federal government to provincial governments in order to fund these provincial services. Though a governing body of a given jurisdiction can control the amount of revenue it raises through taxes, each region has inherent limits in its abilities to raise such revenues. For example, a jurisdiction with a particularly strong economy can perhaps raise 10% more in taxes on a per capita basis than a neighboring jurisdiction which exports a commodity currently trading at reduced rates. This scenario could come about through natural differences, such as access, or lack thereof, to waterways such as the St. Lawrence River, deep ports for resource exportation such as Halifax, high levels of exploitable natural resources, such as British Columbia, or a niche market, such as the auto manufacturing industry in southern Ontario. The ability to raise revenue through taxes is called the fiscal capacity. Historic events in the late 19th and early 20th centuries highlighted a number of regional differences across Canada. In the decades following Confederation, these regional differences were exacerbated during the Great Depression. One example of this was the disparaging comment made by Prime Minister R.B. Bennett, amounting to naming the Canadian prairies as a lost cause following the collapse of wheat prices. In the following years, and as different regions of Canada engaged in the international trade of different resources and services, local economies were affected in diverging manners, resulting in the need for a balancing mechanism. In 1957, legislature was introduced to formalize the equalization process, with per capita revenues from shared taxes being divided to ensure the wealthy provinces had equity with less wealthy provinces. These amounts were based on a standardized tax system, which included personal income tax, corporate income tax, and succession duties. In 1962, additional measures were introduced to include half of natural resource revenues. Today, equalization payments total over $18.96 billion, benefiting 6 provinces across the country. On a per capita basis, Prince Edward Island receives a total of $2,835, while Ontario receives only $70 per person. While Alberta stands out among others for its particularly strong fiscal capacity, the average Canadian fiscal capacity sits at just over $8,000 per capita. Equalization thus enables provinces such as Nova Scotia and Manitoba to provide similar services, as illustrated in blue. There has been a substantial voicing of opinions from both Albertan politicians and citizens. These perspectives have long held that the province receives the short end of the stick, and that Ottawa is using the West to prop up other provinces' cheap education and childcare. In reality, while Quebec receives the largest portion of the equalization payment, Quebecois have some of the highest tax rates across the country, while Alberta doesn't even have a provincial sales tax. Canada's equalization payments must be understood in the context of various federal transfer programs. The past decade has seen changes in the structure of the Canada Health Transfer, the CHT, and the Canada Social Transfer, the CST, resulting in a standardizing and per capita basis of payments. With the CHT and CST totaling over $52 billion and equalization sitting at just $18 billion in 2018, equalization payments now represent roughly 1/4 of all federal transfer payments made to the provinces. A careful consideration of all federal transfer programs will reveal that the shift in CHT to a per capita basis benefits Alberta disproportionately. Health costs vary by provinces in part because of different age distributions, and Alberta's strong economy attracts the youngest median age among the provinces. The typical health expenses incurred by young people are relatively inexpensive, and compared with seniors with chronic health care concerns and regular medical consultations and treatments, which are substantially more expensive. Nevertheless, Alberta receives just as much federal support as Newfoundland does on a per capita basis. Two issues have arisen concerning predictability and sustainability, and the issue of fairness. Some provinces have become dependent on equalization payments and require predictability in funding to plan and budget effectively. Provinces may be funded under one scheme and not another, and changes in the federal government may result in a new approach to equalization. Future sustainability is also a concern as the program grows. Since 2009, the program supports the majority of the population of the country, with the addition of Ontario as a receiving province. Additionally, forecasted inequalities in the future fiscal climate indicate that equalization payments will continue to increase. On the issue of fairness, perceptions of inequity in the existing formula can be attributed to the lack of understanding of equalization payment calculations and policy intent. Those with greatest fiscal capacity contribute disproportionate amounts of federal taxes, but do not receive equalization payments. However, what the federal government chooses to do with tax dollars does not necessarily have to be fair. The redistribution of wealth, which may seem unfair in nature, may alternatively be seen as just in that it successfully addresses the policy objective of enabling less prosperous provinces to provide public services that are reasonably comparable to those provided by more prosperous provinces at reasonably comparable levels of taxation. There are 4 proposed alternatives: a conditional transfer of funds, a revision of the formula, a static response, or an informational and educational response. Let's consider a conditional transfers of funds. The current method does not necessarily create growth and sustainability within a province. This could be resolved by attaching conditions to equalization transfer payments. Attaching conditions that provinces use spending to increase revenue in a sustainable manner may result in the improvement of services with a potential reduction of unsustainable spending. Additionally, audits could provide insight into both use and requirement of funds. In order to build the infrastructure needed to promote sustainability and growth in revenue generation, there may be an initial increase in costs. Using funds to develop and implement revenue generation and growth strategies could lead to a decrease in the necessity for transfer payments down the line. If we consider a revision of the formulae, equalization formulae must examine all major federal-provincial transfers, and a redefining of the metrics could address current and dynamic needs of the provinces, such as disparity in employment rates and social services. What's more, an intersectional approach may assist in gathering a better understanding of the problem to determine a more equitable response. This may take a considerable amount of time, incur substantial administrative cost, and involve many stakeholders. As the provision of federal-provincial equalization transfers is set out in the Constitution, this may also require a constitutional change. Let's consider a static response. As previously noted, current calculation methods are consistent with the intent of the policy, and changing them to provide support to meet inconsistent objectives would be both inappropriate and unconstitutional. Although there would be no immediate cost with this approach, over time there could be an increase in the costs for taxpayers, as data suggests federal-provincial transfers continue to increase. Finally, let's consider an informational and educational response. The most effective and efficient approach to addressing the growing political and public concern would be a public information or educational response. This program would clearly set out accurate facts and supporting data to increase awareness among the public to reduce concerns relating to fairness. The cost relative to other actions would be minimal, as there would be no required amendments to legislation, time spent on consultation or policy-specific research, or change in funds required to be distributed. There would, however, be costs associated with design and implementation of this measure. Such expenses would be consumed in the collection of data on public perception through polls or other research, and in communications via advertisements and other forms of media publications. In summary, due to provincial disparities in resources, population, and revenue, the problem that the federal equalization program set out to respond to still exists. After thorough analysis, it is recommended that the appropriate course of action is to address public condemnation of the existing policy. This would be conducted through a targeted advertising campaign designed with the purpose to educate and inform the public on how the equalization payment program works. The primary advantage to taking an information-based approach is that no existing laws would need to be reconfigured. By removing the legislative process that would need to accompany a change in the current program, we significantly decrease the time and cost required to implement the plan. The advertising campaign, however, is robust and requires the cooperation among several branches of government, including the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, the Privy Council Office, and Public Services and Procurement Canada. This chart outlines the major tasks associated with the implementation of a successful advertising campaign. First, a public opinion survey would be conducted to measure the popular support for the equalization program by province. This is a vital step in order to ensure the campaign is targeted to provinces displaying the least amount of support for the program. This step will cut cost while ensuring the information reaches the intended demographic. Further, provinces with substantial per capita influence over the program should be given high priority in the campaign. Once results from the poll have been established, the advertising proposal can be formulated. With input from the Privy Council Office, the Strategic Communications and Ministerial Affairs Division of the Treasury Board of Canada will draft the plan, ensuring it adheres to the principles of the Canadian Code of Advertising Standards. The plan will be sent to the Cabinet for approval and to the Treasury Board for funding approval. Once this is confirmed, the plan can begin the implementation stage with the SCMA in the driver's seat and the PSPC policing it to ensure compliance with all relevant acts and policies, while the PCO provides critical oversight throughout. The final step, and arguably the most vital, is the evaluation of the success of the campaign. This will be conducted by the SCMA via a public opinion survey and will concentrate on performance indicators. The course of action post-campaign will be driven by the results of this poll. This project will be funded through the Central Advertising Fund. It is important to note that if the campaign's cost is estimated at over $1 million, it must be evaluated through the Advertising Campaign Evaluation Tool managed by the Privy Council Office. The primary expenditures for this plan will be the purchase of media space and the cost of employing a public opinion research company. The government divisions involved have full-time employees already on salary whose responsibility is the planning, coordination, implementation, and oversight of government advertising. This permits the implementation of the advertising campaign without the requirement to form a new agency or program, which will significantly reduce costs. In conclusion, the federal equalization program has developed progressively since the late 1800s. It is a necessary tool that ensures fiscal balance exists among Canadian provinces, therefore safeguarding relatively equal access to public services for all Canadian citizens. Though not perfect, a finely tuned calculation and layers of government oversight contribute to its success. In order to resolve major inconsistencies in public support of the program, a strategically crafted and targeted advertising campaign focused on communicating the facts surrounding the equalization program is the recommended course of action. It should be noted that any discussion of providing services to Canadians must acknowledge the continued unequal treatment of Indigenous peoples. While the equalization program seeks to allocate tax revenue to alleviate inequality at a provincial level, Canadians everywhere should continue to work for the fair distribution of fiscal resources to all living here. On behalf of Sam, Christine, Jessica, Jackson, and myself, Mark, Thank you for your attention and consideration in this matter. This concludes our presentation.